Hi, I'm Becky Doonan and I work as a freelance textile conservator in and around Maastricht in the south of the Netherlands. Today I will be talking about a recent project I undertook in conjunction with the Museum Van De Vrouw as part of an ongoing drive to improve the storage of their costume collection. So let me introduce you to my talk, Wasting Away, Developing a Hanging Waist Support System for Safe Costume Storage. Here is a brief outline of what my talk will encompass today. I will introduce the project and discuss the aims, issues, and development of the solution. I'll begin by just outlining the context and underlying reasons for this project. The Museum Van De Vrouw, or in English, the Museum of the Woman, is a small museum that grew out of the private collection of a local resident in Echt in the Netherlands. This woman had a particular interest in collecting objects that reflected the everyday lives of women throughout history, be that in the domestic, professional, or political sphere. The collection is therefore quite unique and provides an interesting antithesis to the generally more male-dominated narratives in many conventional museums. The museum is currently undergoing a major rearrangement of its storage depots, with the aim of increasing access, assessing the condition and scope of the collection, and improving the utilization of the space available. Like most museums, there is little to no spare storage space. My role focuses on the reorganization of the costume storage depot, containing over 10,000 garments that range from mid-19th century to the present day. During this reorganization, I noticed a few recurring condition issues in the garments we were moving. Whilst the most fragile garments are housed in archival boxes, there isn't space for more of these, and so the majority of the collection hangs in racks. While this is fine for many garments, some were displaying severe distortion and damage. These issues can be divided into a few different categories. First is those with damaged or fragile shoulder and neckline areas. In particular, some of the dresses with heavier skirts were displaying a lot of strain in the bodice area. The second group comprises strapless dresses or dresses with wide necklines. Hangers are not ideal for these styles as they have minimal or no shoulder from which to hang. They often have hanging loops attached to the side seams, but these can cause real points of strain in the garment and further distortion. Off-the-shoulder styles are also prone to slipping off hangers, as can be seen from the picture in the center of the screen. And finally, distortion of structural bodices due to the lack of internal support. Often this is also in combination with full, heavy skirts. These type of bodices are often complex structures made of several layers of fabric combined with boning and facings. Distortion can be challenging or sometimes impossible to reverse and can also lead to the disparate materials damaging each other. From these issues, I formed my aims and objectives for what I wanted the mount to achieve. Because of the limited storage space, these vulnerable garments still needed to be hung for storage, so some kind of hanging mount was needed. This mount needed to provide more support than a standard hanger, spreading the weight of the garment more evenly to prevent points of strain from forming. It needed to be simple and time-effective to make and make efficient use of materials because of budgetary constraints. It also needed to be easy to use, as the main task force of the museum are volunteers with a variety of experience levels and backgrounds. Making a mount that is complicated to install and deinstall only increases the chances of objects being damaged through handling. Finally, it needed to not increase the footprint of the garment more than absolutely necessary. Hanging full-size mannequin forms in storage would be an extremely inefficient use of space, so this mount needed to be relatively thin if possible. I started by looking at possible alternatives to conventional clothes hangers. My findings varied and encompassed both those used in commercial settings as well as those used in heritage environments. These were a few examples I came across: carved ethofoam forms, padded inserts, display mounts, mannequins, fosse-shaped mounts, and commercially available plastic torso forms often used in shop displays. Whilst each of these had its advantages, none was quite suitable for this particular application. From these emerged the idea of some kind of minimalist hanging torso form made from archival quality materials. During my studies at the Centre for Textile Conservation in Glasgow, I had made a hanging torso form for a 1950s Dior dress from Manchester Art Gallery that I was treating for similar support issues. Inspired by the mounts made at Glasgow museums for an exhibition of swimwear, I used fosse-shape, a noddy-tested, thick polyester felt that can be manipulated and shaped through the application of heat, steam, and pressure. However, achieving a perfect fit for this project had been very time-intensive, involving taking a pattern from the corseted inside of the dress and recreating this as a rigid fosse-shaped form. This kind of time investment just wasn't feasible for my current situation, with time and budget both being limited. I needed something quick, repeatable, and that could easily achieve a good fit within a dress to provide the support needed. I chose to use one dress as a focus to test my ideas on. This dress seemed an ideal candidate. The need for support can be clearly seen in the massive distortions in the torso and hip area. Due to my previous positive experience with fosse shape, I decided to explore the potential of this material further. It possesses a useful set of qualities, rigid enough to offer the support needed, but moldable and sewable, so easy to manipulate, and also friendlier to the inside of a garment than something more solid and hard-edged. For the mount itself, I focused my attention on where I wanted the weight of the garment to sit. The success of my mount for the Dior dress was largely due to the support it provided at the waist and hip sections, which relieved the upper bodice of the weight of the heavy skirts. The slight shaping in the bust area prevented the front of the dress from caving inwards, thereby relieving distortion. For this new mount, I simplified the shapes involved. Describing a three-dimensional form in 2D measurements can quickly get very complicated, so I wanted to keep measurements to a minimum. Using strips of fosse shape, my design needed only the waist circumference, hip circumference, back length, and shoulder width. On the top left is the basic pattern for the mount. The waist strip is a rectangle of fosse shape, the length of the hip circumference. By making small darts, the top edge is reduced to the length of the waist circumference, so that the whole section flares slightly. The shoulder sections are two strips that loop over and attach to the waist section at the front and back. Fosse shape shrinks by approximately 10% when heated, so every measurement should be scaled up by this amount when drafting the pattern. One of the main issues I came across when working with fosse shape in the past was the challenge of finding something suitable to shape it around. For this reason, I chose to confine myself to simple shapes for this project. Because this mount only needed simple bends in otherwise straight strips, I was able to use a section of drain pipe wrapped in a towel to make the bends. I found that the easiest way of forming each section was to steam the straight sections on an ironing board first, leaving the bend sections flexible. It was then easy to manipulate the bends around the drain pipe. Because each of the components is just a straight strip, these were quickly and easily covered using tubular cotton stockinette, creating a smooth finish to sit safely against the inside of the garment. The individual components were placed into the garment unjoined. It was then very straightforward to position them so that they fit exactly within the dress and stitch the fosse shape elements together to form the final mount. On the left, you can see the before treatment photo, and on the right is the dress on the finished form. The pleated bust sections are no longer being pulled down by the skirt, and the empire waist sits horizontally across the torso, allowing the fabric of the skirt to fall vertically. The final mount is definitely an improvement on a standard hanger in terms of the support it provides. The steps needed to make it and fit it accurately to the garment were simple and straightforward, and because of the simple rectangular shapes of the components, there was very little waste when cutting out the fosse-shaped sections. Indeed, it used much less fosse shape than would be needed to create a full torso. As can be seen from this photo, it was possible to keep the mounted garment flat enough so that it doesn't take up excessive room once hung in storage. And because the garment opened to the waist, it was very easy to position the mount inside. There were also some limitations to the suitability of this mount. It does rely on a garment having a distinct waist to hip difference, so would be much less suited to the more shapeless dresses such as those characteristic of the 1920s. And garments without an opening bodice would also prove challenging to fit the mount safely into. So to conclude, this mount offers a simple and affordable solution for the hanging of certain styles of dresses that are unsuitable for standard hangers. I feel it would be particularly suited to some of the more structured and shapely dress styles typical of the 19th century. This mount is still very much in its early stages, its developing and testing being somewhat put on hold by COVID-19. However, I intend to continue exploring its potential and monitoring the conditions of the dresses hung upon it to see how it holds up over time. I would love to hear from anyone else interested in trying it out, so please feel free to get in touch. I would like to say a big thank you to the team at the Museum Van De Vrouw for allowing me such freedom within the collection. This project has been a bit of a tangent from the main focus of reorganising the storage, and so I appreciate their indulgence in my idea and their patience in deciphering my ever-developing Dutch. Also, a massive thanks to the team behind this year's International Map Makers Forum. Thank you so much for putting the conference together and giving me the chance to participate. Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to ask any questions and I will do my best to answer them.
Hi, Becky.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.
That was fantastic. I work at the Arts Centre Melbourne, and we have a huge performing arts collection, and we just did this project which we called the Opera Australian Documentation Project, and we had so many large and heavy costumes that we were trying to obviously store properly. And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your system, and do you think it's suitable for heavy costumes, or what's the limit, do you think?
I think the limit really is where the weight is able to sit. So this really takes the weight off the shoulders. So if the costume has like a really defined waist, then this would be very suitable if the waist is strong enough to then hold the weight of the skirts. It really divides up the weight. So the weight of the bodice is sitting on the shoulders, the weight of the skirts is sitting on the waist of the mount. So I think the limitation would be if you had like fragile fabrics at the waist that couldn't hold the weight of the skirt. But I have seen some people use taping systems for that kind of thing.
Thank you. Great. Can you also talk to us a little bit about the hangers? Did you have to do many modifications to the hangers as you were quickly working through this system?
Beyond just padding them like normal padded hangers, no.
Okay.
It was just a case of making sure that they were the right kind of width for the garment, but that's standard anyway.
Yep, great, thank you. There's a question here about how long did it take to make one mount?
The first ones, I guess I was still sort of developing them and getting a feel for what worked and what didn't. I'd say about an hour and a half. But I think I'd hoped to kind of produce more of them, but then Corona struck and the museum's been shut for quite a while now. And I think, yeah, around an hour, possibly a bit less.
Great. And do you understand? Have you got a sense of how much it cost per mount, or overall for how many costumes?
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head the price of fuss shape, but it took, I think, about 40 centimetres by a metre of fuss shape.
Per mount?
So you could get per mount. And it would depend a little bit on the size of the costume. Obviously, a bigger costume, like a bigger size, would need slightly more. But because it's strips, there's very little waste.
Yeah, fantastic. It's super efficient.
Yeah.
There's another question here around, for the off-the-shoulder costumes, did you add in an extension beyond the hanger to support the arms?
So the strips for the shoulders, you can make them of varying widths, and by angling them slightly outwards, you can extend the shoulders just by the way you cut it. So instead of cutting a straight strip, you can cut a slight wedge. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Just to widen it out. Yeah.
Yep. And someone asked, could you actually please repeat again how you were shaping the foss shape? Oh,
yeah, it was round a section of old drain pipe. I just wrapped it in a towel so that there wouldn't be any kind of sticking between the foss shape and the drain pipe when you used the steamer on it. And then, yeah, I had an ironing board, so I shrunk the flat sections first and just left the bits that would be curved floppy. And then you can fold them around the drain pipe and just steam away. And it was quite straightforward, because I found previously finding a suitable size body to shrink the foss shape over, if you didn't happen to have a mannequin of that size, it could be kind of a bit tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question here from Marcy, and she's saying, is there a particular reason for using FOSS shape for the vertical strips instead of just using something like twill tape to suspend the hip support?
That's a good idea, actually. I guess I was thinking in terms of FOSS shape anyway, and I was thinking of slightly more solid forms than just to make them slightly more robust. But I think actually twill tape would probably work very well for a lot of the costumes. Maybe not so much for the off the shoulder kind of ones, but in the hangers are padded anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe something to try in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
There's a question here from Jill. She's complimenting you, saying great design. And then she's saying, did you cover the FOSS shape pieces with Stockinette also?
Yes. Yeah, I just got the narrow tubular stockinette and it fits right over, so you don't have to seam all the way up the back. You literally just put it on like a sock and then just stitch the ends under, just so it's all smooth against the inside of the garment.
And Ahmed's got a question here saying, why not store them horizontally without hanging them?
It was mainly because of the context of the museum. So they don't have a lot of storage space, and they do have the most fragile costumes stored in boxes, but their storage is full. There is no more horizontal box storage space. So what is hanging really needs to stay hanging. It's a case of finding a safer way to do it.
Yep, thank you. Nicole asks, what weight FOSS shape did you use?
I used the thicker stuff. Is it the 600? I always get them muddled up, but the thicker stuff. But I have also heard that if you only have the thinner stuff, you can use 2 layers and steam them together, and it creates the same sort of weight and material properties as the thicker stuff.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Helen, and she's saying, can you talk a little bit more about FOSS shape and testing it for its archival status? Can the material of the item sit directly on the surface, and is the surface smooth?
It is quite smooth, and it has been Oddy tested. It passed Oddy testing. I would be personally slightly concerned that the small fibres might migrate into the object. I'm not sure about that. I've only ever used it covered. It's slightly grippy, not to the level of polyester wadding, but something a bit more like felt. So I prefer to cover it, to be on the safe side, to be honest.
Yep.
I don't know how other people feel about that. I'd be interested in hearing how other people use it.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear that. Emily asks, can this mount work for hanging shirts only? Where she's saying, where there's a separate bodice and a skirt.
Oh, for skirts only. Yeah, that is actually something I would like to try, because at the moment the museum where skirts are hanging, it's often like clip hangers, and can be quite damaging to some of them. So I do want to try that. I think it would be a case of, is there enough difference between the waist and the hip? So skirts that sit on the hip wouldn't be so suitable, but as long as there's a distinct waist.
Thank you. And Mare says, how did you shrink and form the waistband?
So first I stitched the darts. So it's just a rectangular strip with darts, like in dressmaking, that just bring the points in slightly closer. And then I used the steamer, laid it flat on an ironing board, steamed the flat sections, just leaving the curved areas. And then I used a drain pipe to form the curve at the sides. So you basically get a large oval, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you, Becky. And one last question is, have you evaluated how much additional hanging space is taken up by the FOSS shape form?
I haven't, but it's something that I want to evaluate when we have a few more of them. At the moment, we only have a few because everything was a bit delayed, and some of the dresses, like each dress is so different that it's hard to evaluate exactly how much. I think we need to do it on more of a variety of dresses to be able to establish how much it's growing it. But a lot of the skirts are so bulky that actually the space taken up by hanging is quite significantly more than the mounted bodice section would be, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thanks so much, Becky. That was wonderful and such a great project. I'll hand back to Jessie.
Yeah, thank you, Becky, for joining us for the Q&A. And if any questions come up for anyone about Becky's presentation, or if you want to share how you use Foshape, please feel free to contact her. Her email is in the chat as well. And you can reach out to her at our after party